In the fun and exciting capitalist landscape we find ourselves in, the answer to everything always seems to be more and faster. But sometimes we have to sit and reflect. Is more and faster always the right answer? Well, according to our infinite growth mindset, the answer is yes. And it comes as no surprise that this is present in the video games industry too, whether in the games we play or the consoles we use to play them. Today, we're focusing on the latter. These days, we have a console that can run games at 1 billion frames per second, and so that leaves us with the question, what's the next evolution? It seems that consoles these days need to have the most processing power, have the most realistic gameplay you've ever seen in your life, be the most expensive. But what if it just needs to be a little silly? Consoles have come a long way since their introduction in the 1970s. Back then, we were still trying to find the best way to interact with the screen that was in front of us. Is it through a dial and some numbers? Is it through some buttons and some other buttons? Is it through a joystick and a button? But as we progressed through the 70s and on into the 80s and 90s, we began to see consoles lock in their controllers' designs and become more and more powerful. We began to see a general increase in processing power from consoles as the new versions were released. This allowed games to be bigger, including more information and graphics and gameplay than before. While there are many console makers that had a hand in getting us to where we are today, I've decided, for this video, we're going to focus on the big three: Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. Generally speaking, Sony and Microsoft's focus as far as consoles go tends to be on the processing power side of things. Each console released is more powerful than the last, featuring more teraflops and gigabytes and gigahertz and keywords than the one before. That being said, the difference in the amount of power between each console used to be super noticeable. Like PS1 graphics versus the PS3 graphics versus the PS4 graphics versus the PS5 graphics, where it looks kind of the same. While Sony and Microsoft tend to focus their fire on power, Nintendo takes a different route. Rather than focus on how well my Switch handles this one level of Hades where everyone's shooting at me, there's 100 things on the screen and it's a slideshow, they tend to focus on how we interact with the console itself. Going back to the late 1980s, there weren't a ton of handheld consoles, and while they did exist, they just weren't that popular. But that all changed when Nintendo released the original Game Boy. With games such as Tetris, Super Mario Land, and tennis, people ate this thing up. Nintendo was willing to go out on a bit of a limb and try something new, and lucky for them, it stuck. They tend to do this pretty consistently, but it doesn't always work out for them. For example, in 1995, they released the Virtual Boy, a VR headset-esque console that tended to make you motion sick and was a commercial failure.
It needs your eyes.
Of course, this scared Nintendo off a little bit. I mean, you can't just release a bunch of commercial failures and still exist as a company. But 11 years later, Nintendo released a new way to play games. The Nintendo Wii was an insane hit. If you were alive in 2006, you might remember the Wii fever everyone seemed to be struck by. The motion controls on the Wii were something that hadn't really been done before, and rather than release a GameCube 2 with more polygons, they decided to create a new way to play.
The graveyard of any industry is filled with the headstones of companies who decided to keep doing things the same old way.
This trend continues, innovating their handheld consoles, moving on from the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance era and on into the DS era. The DS was also innovative in its own way, featuring 2 screens instead of just one, and a touchscreen on the bottom so you can interact with your virtual dogs or play something else that involves touchscreen. Mario Party? Of course, Nintendo's had their hiccups, but for the most part, their recent console innovations have released to general success and public excitement. That's not to say Sony and Microsoft haven't wavered from the path of consoles only. Sony released the Move, motion controls, PSVR, the camera that goes with that, and has delved occasionally into handheld consoles with the PSP, PS Vita, and then, you know, like their PS5 controllers, like, pretty cool, like with these. Microsoft had the Kinect, but other than that, they haven't really wavered from the path of consoles and naming them in the most confusing way possible. It just seems like these two aren't interested in gambling on creating a new way to play like Nintendo is. The fear of failure and losing a bunch of money and maybe tanking their stock prices just seems to scare them off. And if you ask me, which you didn't, I'd say this is a critical flaw. If we're comparing this generation's console with the previous, there really isn't much of a difference from like the user noticing it side of things. And if we're focusing on Sony only, most of the PS5 games released during this cycle have also been released on PS4. So why would I buy the new console? Sure, it's more powerful, but when am I using that power? Why would I even need that power if the game runs fine on a 12-year-old console? And that's the issue we're running into, folks. Sure, developers can release a game that uses the full power of the console, but what makes the game fun isn't how much RAM and shit it's using, it's in the game design itself. There have been a couple games that run really nice on the PS5. They look really cool, the developers use the full power of the console, they're fun. But if we're thinking long term here, it might be best if consoles branch out a little bit. I mean, there's only so much power I think you can jam into one of these. I might be wrong, but I think there's only so much power you can jam into one of these. From a design standpoint, not focusing on power right now, the way a studio would go about designing a game for a Nintendo DS versus a PS5 would be very different. For the Nintendo DS, you'd have to factor in the 2 screens versus just 1, and the use of a touch screen rather than just button input. For the PS5, you just have the 1 screen, and then you have all of these buttons and also like the adaptive triggers and stuff. So the variation between the two closes some doors but opens others. Like, you couldn't play Wii Tennis on an Xbox. It would be a completely different experience. On the Xbox, would I just sit there and mash A while I'm playing tennis? While with the Wii, I could be swinging the remote at an invisible ball until I let go of it, shattering my dad's television? Completely different experience. If the point of video games is to have fun and provide entertainment, then why wouldn't you go the route that Nintendo has historically gone? With the upcoming release of the Switch 2, I think the question of innovation versus power is especially relevant. We can all agree that the Switch could use a little more power. But does the release of the Switch 2 signal a change in Nintendo's trajectory? Are they deciding they really just want to focus on creating more and more powerful consoles? Are they hanging up the towel on innovation and silly things like Nintendo Labo? Or is this just like the DS, DS Lite, DSi, 3DS, 2DS era where Nintendo's just in a phase and they'll grow out of it soon? So, I don't know, let me know in the comments below if it's a lot different or if it's not, because I'm from the past and I don't know. For me, if the Switch 2 isn't like super duper innovative or anything, then I hope this is kind of just a phase. While I'm excited for the Switch 2, I don't necessarily want to just keep forking over more and more money for consoles that do more or less the same thing. But, you know, those are just my thoughts. Please be nice to me. Please be nice to me. Thanks for watching this video. If you like this video, give it a like, subscribe if you want to. Join the 500 other people that are for some reason subscribed to this channel. Join me next time where I fall asleep live on camera. Bye! I think video games are a scam.